Well, well, well. The Georgia Republican-led Senate has done something that's both spicy and useful, which is kind of weird to think. They have just passed a bill requiring ID to vote absentee. And since it rhymes, it's true. In this video, we're going to quickly talk about what the bill is, why it makes people mad, and why it's important. All of those things. But why am I talking about this? I'm Nick Rekieta of Rekieta Law, a small law firm in central Minnesota. I'm a lawyer, but I'm also a legal and political commentator here on YouTube. So if you like legal and political news, opinion, analysis, commentary, jokes, hit the subscribe button, hit the notification bell. Don't miss any videos. And make sure you watch through to the end so you get all of the info. Okay. So, what is this bill? This bill would require you to have an ID number to vote absentee in Georgia. Now, I don't want to say this is maybe in response to the backlash over how Georgia's elections were handled in the 2020 general election, but it definitely is. People are mad. Republicans are mad. You might be mad. I don't know. But in Georgia, a heavily Republican state, judging by the makeup of its state legislatures, the House and the Senate of Georgia are both heavily Republican. Somehow it flipped completely blue for the U.S. Senate and for the presidency. And some people have questions about that. But this isn't about those questions at all. This is about requiring an ID to vote absentee. Now, currently, to verify an absentee ballot, they use a signature verification match in which a ballot envelope, not the ballot itself, because those have to be secret. So before that's open, the ballot envelope is run through a machine which scans a signature that's on the envelope. That machine uses software to determine if that signature matches the signature on the voter registration. If it does, it's good. If it doesn't match it, according to the machine, it's sent for human review. And then a big, messy process occurs after that. And that process got extra messy in 2020 because of a last-minute change to the rules through the judiciary, which some people would call unconstitutional, particularly Lynn Wood and maybe, just about everybody who actually understands how these things are supposed to be done through the legislature would consider that unconstitutional, but not any courts, though. None of the courts wanted to hear about it, so it's fine. It's fine. Republicans are trying to do this and fix it legislatively, which is the way that all of these changes should be made. All of them, including the ones that were made otherwise. But right now, they're trying to go ahead and solidify this. So instead of having a computer try and match up a signature, or even worse, sending it to a human review panel to match up a signature, what they're proposing is much simpler. You put your ID number on your envelope, and they match that to an existing state database that isn't impacted by, different moods, different temperatures, different writing styles, nothing like that. Having a cold, someone developing an illness, all sorts of things can impact how your signature looks. If your hand is just tired, if you sign 10 other things that day, you might not sign something the same. So that being said, they're like, hey, why don't we just put an ID number on? We've got this whole database of state ID numbers, and we can just easily cross-reference a number that's on an envelope versus a number that's in a system. And computers are actually very good at scanning numbers, even if they're handwritten. And if that goes to a human, it's much easier to determine if someone wrote a 4 or an 8 than it is to determine if the loop on their signature is the same. So this is a pretty good and objective change. But why is it making people mad? Of course, anything passed by Republicans that has to do with a vote, according to Democrats, is racist. And I'm not joking. I'm not exaggerating. That is how they approach any sort of measure, especially measures that would secure in some way the vote. This is the opposition to voter ID. Now think about this. Democrat politicians, not all Democrats, only Democrat politicians oppose voter ID and security measures because they literally believe that minorities are incapable of dealing with them because they're actually racist. They're actually horrible, and they think that minorities cannot meet requirements that white people can. That's not me. I don't think that. I think that's preposterous. That is what Democrat politicians have held as their motivation for opposing measures to secure the vote forever, that Republicans are just racist. Now, I would maybe argue that this is a projection from the racist Democrat past and how they treated minorities, throughout the Jim Crow era. That was Democrats in the South, by the way, and all of that stuff. But that's a discussion for another day. So as on cue, the opposition is coming in from Democrats. The bill has already been met with opposition from Democrats and voting rights groups, read other Democrats, who say the legislation would make it difficult for voters who don't have a driver's license or state identification card to vote absentee. Yes, it would make it impossible for them to do so unless they went and got an ID. It wouldn't just make it difficult. It would make it flat out impossible. You would have to have your voter ID number or your ID number from your state identification to vote absentee, not to vote. And this is the important distinction, because you have a sort of right to vote. It's a right that's bestowed by the state, and it's controlled in its scope by the state legislature. Once the state legislature grants you a right to vote, you have a right to vote. But that right to vote has always meant an in-person vote where you go in and abide by the vote. And they can't stop you from doing that. They can't intimidate you at polling places. We have all kinds of law and jurisprudence around the fact that you get to go vote once that right is bestowed upon you. Everything else is extra. An absentee is a very big everything else. If you don't have a voter ID, you can go, or if you don't have an ID card, you can go in and vote in person. They can't restrict you from doing that. And the Voting Rights Act has prevented the overall implementation of a voter ID over and over and over again for general in-person voting, because they say that that's an impermissible infringement. I may disagree with that, but that's how it's gone. The way this is intended to work is absentee is to provide an alternative and expanded access to voting. Now, the reason that it's not a guaranteed right is because absentee voting is notoriously suspicious. And this isn't a Republican thing. This isn't a 2020 thing. This goes way back, all the way back. This is why they did in-person voting so frequently, why it's the de facto measure for voting, is because absentee voting is inherently problematic. So it's an expansion of the right. And the way that courts treat expansions of the right is critical here, because if you're expanding the right, you can't, by definition, be restricting the right by restricting the amount of expansion that occurs. So if everybody can vote in person and then only 97% of people can vote absentee, that's not a restriction of the right to vote. By definition, the right to vote is restricted to voting in person, and everything else is gravy. That's your biscuit. There's your gravy. There you go, Georgia. Now you understand. Your gravy doesn't cover all of the biscuit. This is a good analogy, and now I'm hungry. Your gravy doesn't cover all of the biscuit. It covers most of the biscuit, but sometimes there's a little dry crumb peeking out the side, and that's when you get to find out if the biscuit itself is good, or rather the gravy is just lying to you. And that's what's going on here. The underlying vote is still a right that is shared by all. The absentee is an expansion, but that is not a helpful narrative to Democrats. So they are saying that this is suppression of minorities, again, because they're racist. I don't know how else to say it. I'm sorry, I don't like playing the racist card, but that's kind of what's going on. So here's the Republican response. It's not about disenfranchising voters. It's not about overly burdening the electorate. It's about efficiency, integrity, allowing the Georgia public to have confidence in the vote. And this is crucial because a lot of people have lost confidence in the vote since the 2020 election. This is very, very important. They must reestablish confidence in the vote. Otherwise, the vote doesn't matter. And I know a lot of people, probably even many people watching this video, don't really have any faith in the voting system right now. And so Republicans, especially in some particular swing states, should be working to pass measures to secure the vote and restore confidence. That's what the Georgia GOP is doing here. Now, they've got This is drawing. So last week, the Georgia Republicans also filed a sweeping 48-page election bill that would place further limitations on voting if passed, including a provision that would prohibit counties and municipalities from holding advanced voting on Sundays, a day that black churches in the state have previously used to increase voter participation among congregants with souls to the polls efforts. Here's the thing, though. That's still an expansion. Early voting is extra voting. Absentee voting is extra voting. If a state wanted to allow late voting, that would be extra voting. And those measures can all be restricted. They can, because they're all extra. Your right to vote is really confined to the one voting day. Everything else is not really part of that. And so this has been upheld by courts over and over and over again. The right to vote involves the vote day. All of the other stuff is extra, and those expansions do not have to be fully expansive. Now, if they're entirely discriminatory, they can make an argument and they may win on that argument. But in general, even those arguments made that these things are particularly discriminatory in their impact, not on their face. If it's a facially discriminatory bill, like it says, only white people can vote early, that's a big difference, right? They can't do that. But if it just has a different impact on different groups, in this case, not just African Americans, but specifically church-going African Americans who participated in this event, that might not be enough. That might not be enough. For one, it's not a blanket or categorical removal of a particular total class's right. But anyway, I'm getting too deep into the woods. This is a good bill. I'm a proponent of voter ID entirely. I would love to know what you guys think about securing the vote. Is voter ID it? Are these the ways to do it? I think this is a great way to start because you have to secure the part of the vote that is most in question. And for most Americans right now, that's absentee ballots. And they've done a very interesting proposal here. It covers 97% of people. Those 3% of people have a long time to go get an ID. They have a year and a half now to go get an ID before the next general election. So let me know what you think down in the comments below. Hope you enjoyed this. Hope you learned something. And we'll talk soon. Have a good day. Peace. Peace.